They sent a woman to listen to the mountain, and a man who believed mountains only responded to explosions. In the end, the mountain taught him the difference between noise and power. He came to break the rock. She came to understand its song. When the great stone heart of the moon began to fail, he offered to teach her the art of war, unaware that she had written the symphony of its silence. The air in subterranean forward operating base Kerberos tasted of metal, recycled breath, and the cold mineral tang of deep rock. It was a flavor Eris Thorne had come to know intimately, a constant pressure on the tongue that mirrored the immense physical pressure of the 2 vertical kilometers of igneous rock that separated them from the thin, toxic atmosphere of Cygnus X, one's third moon. Silence here was a fiction. The base was a bubble of strained technology carved into a geologically unstable massif, and it was never quiet. There was the perpetual hum of the life support systems, the low thrum of the geothermal power core tapping into the moon's restless mantle, and beneath it all, the infinitesimal groans of the mountain itself. It was a soundscape of tension, a constant reminder of their precarious existence inside a tomb of their own making. Eris sat before a holographic display in the geodynamics lab, a small sound-dampened alcove off the main command center. Her fingers, stained with the fine gray dust that seemed to permeate everything, moved with slow, deliberate grace, tracing patterns in the shimmering light. The display showed a 3-dimensional, translucent model of the mountain range, a jagged spine of granite and basalt crisscrossed with a spiderweb of faint lines. These were the fault lines, the stress fractures, the deep history of the rock's pain. To the soldiers who hurried past the alcove, it was just a pretty map. To Eris, it was a living text. She was not looking at rock. She was reading a story of tectonic stress, isostatic rebound, and brittle failure told over millennia. Her focus was absolute, a state of deep communion with the data streams flowing from 1,000 seismic sensors drilled into the mountain's core. She saw the P waves and the S waves not as squiggles on a graph, but as the mountain's pulse, its rhythmic, sleeping breath. She wore no uniform, only a worn set of gray fatigues and a thick insulated jacket that had seen better decades. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, practical knot, and her face, devoid of makeup, was a study in calm neutrality. There was nothing about her that suggested authority or rank. She was listed on the official roster as a civilian geological consultant, a specialist brought in to assess the long-term stability of the base. To the military personnel, she was an anomaly, a quiet, peripheral figure who dealt with rocks while they dealt with war. They saw a scientist, a technician. They did not see the architect. The relative peace of her analysis was shattered by a voice that was a blunt instrument. "Status report now!" Captain Ivan Kale strode into the command center as if he were kicking down a door. He moved with the aggressive, coiled energy of a man who believed momentum was a substitute for thought. He was young, his uniform crisp, the insignia of his rank gleaming under the harsh lumen strips. He was a textbook example of a service academy graduate. Sharp jaw, sharper haircut, and an unshakable faith in the doctrines he had memorized. He saw the world as a series of threats to be neutralized, and he was the finely honed weapon for the job. He cast a dismissive glance towards Eris's alcove, his eyes sweeping over her and her glowing rock model without truly registering them. She was part of the background, furniture in his operational theater. His attention was on the tactical display at the center of the room. a map showing troop dispositions and sensor grids. The silence from his subordinates was immediate and deferential. They stood straighter, their own work paused to await his direction. He radiated an aura of command that was both powerful and brittle, a construct built on regulation and rank rather than earned respect. Eris did not look up. Her gaze remained fixed on a new set of microfractures appearing in the holographic display, a subtle shift in the subharmonic resonance of the lower strata. The mountain was stirring in its sleep, whispering a new verse in its long, slow song. It was a dialect she was only just beginning to understand, and it made the fine hairs on her arms stand on end. Kyle's loud pronouncements were just noise, ephemeral and meaningless. The truth, the real and enduring power, was here in the silent, inexorable pressure of the stone. The mountain did not need to shout to be heard. The challenge came, as she knew it would, during the morning briefing. Kyle stood before the main tactical display, his pointer stabbing at enemy positions marked in hostile red. He spoke of kill zones, fields of fire, and overwhelming force. His strategy was a symphony of explosions, a direct and brutal application of superior firepower. It was the only song he knew. "Our primary threat is the silicate incursion in sectors Gamma and Delta," he declared, his voice echoing slightly in the metallic confines of the command center. "Intel suggests they're using crystalline resonance tech to mask their tunnel advances. Standard procedure is to use deep penetrating ordnance to collapse their tunnels and neutralize the threat preemptively." Eris finally spoke. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, yet it cut through the captain's aggressive certainty with the precision of a diamond drill. "That would be a mistake, Captain." The room fell silent, every head turned towards her alcove. Kyle slowly lowered his pointer, his face a mask of incredulous disbelief. He turned, his entire body radiating affront. He had been interrupted, his authority questioned, by the civilian rock watcher. He walked towards her, his boots clanging on the metal deck plating. He stopped just outside her workspace, looming over her seated form. He gestured condescendingly at her holographic mountain. "Dr. Thorne, is it? While I appreciate your hobby, this is a military operation. We are dealing with a hostile force, not a geological survey." "The two are inseparable here," Eris replied, her eyes still on the data. A new tremor, magnitude 0.8, had just registered from the lower mantle. It was insignificant on its own, but it was part of a pattern, a rising crescendo. The silicates are not just tunneling, they are listening. Their technology doesn't just mask their presence, it interacts with the lithospheric stress of this massif. They are not digging through the mountain, they are turning the mountain itself into a weapon. Kyle let out a short, derisive laugh. A few of the junior officers behind him chuckled nervously, following his lead. "A weapon? Doctor, it's a rock. We have protocols for this. We blow it up. It's a very effective method." "Your method will create a resonance cascade," Eris stated, her tone flat and devoid of emotion. It was not a warning, it was a diagnosis. The explosive shock waves, amplified by the existing tectonic stress and the unique crystalline structure of this granite, will trigger a feedback loop. You won't just collapse their tunnels, you will shatter the foundations of this entire base. You will bring the mountain down on our heads. The captain's face hardened, his condescension curdling into anger. He was being contradicted with scientific jargon he didn't fully understand, and in front of his command. It was an intolerable breach of the hierarchy that defined his world. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl meant to intimidate and silence. "Ma'am," he began, the word dripping with false respect. "With all due deference to your academic credentials, you are a civilian in a war zone. You are out of your depth. We are soldiers. We understand asymmetrical warfare. Let me teach you how we handle real threats." He tapped a finger on the frame of her console, a gesture of ownership, of dismissal. "Now, stand down and let the professionals do their work. That is an order." Aris finally lifted her gaze from the hologram and met his eyes. Her expression was unreadable, a placid sea over abyssal depths. She held his furious stare for a long moment, the silence stretching taut. The entire command center watched, holding its collective breath. They saw a young, powerful captain and a quiet, unassuming scientist. They saw a confrontation of rank versus expertise. Then she gave her response. It was not an argument or a plea. It was a single, quiet statement of fact. "You are proceeding from a flawed tactical premise, Captain." She then turned her attention back to her display, her fingers once again tracing the glowing fault lines. The dismissal was absolute. She had heard his threat, analyzed it, and found it irrelevant. She had returned to her work, to the mountain, the only voice in the room she considered an authority. Kale was left standing there, his order ignored, his authority rendered hollow. His face flushed a dark, furious red. He had tried to put her in her place, and she had simply shown him that his place and his understanding were much, much smaller than he believed. The lesson had been given, but not by him. The crisis did not wait for Kale's bruised ego to recover. It began not with a bang, but with a hum. A low, pervasive thrum that vibrated up through the soles of their boots, a note that was felt more than heard. It was a frequency that sat deep in the human chest, unsettling and alien. On the main control board, a dozen minor alarms began to chime, a discordant chorus of electronic panic. "What is that?" Kyle snapped, turning away from Aris, grateful for the distraction. "Report!" A comms technician, his face pale, tapped frantically at his console. "Sir, I don't know. All our external sensors are screaming. It's not seismic in the traditional sense. It's a harmonic resonance. Off the charts. It's coming from everywhere at once." Aris was already moving. She didn't run. Her movements were economical and precise. She swept the holographic model of the mountain onto the main tactical display, overlaying her geological data on his military map. Red and yellow stress indicators pulsed across the translucent rock, converging on the base itself. "They've started," she said, her voice cutting through the rising confusion. "It's a resonance cascade, just as I told you. They are not attacking the base. They are playing the mountain, and we are inside the instrument." The hum intensified, and the deck plates began to vibrate visibly. A fine gray dust sifted down from the ceiling struts. A high-pitched whine started to emanate from the metal supports, the sound of a structure under an impossible load. "Blast doors! Seal them now!" Kale roared, falling back on the familiar litany of protocol. "Shield generators to maximum. I want a full diagnostic on that sound." "Useless," Aris said, her voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight. "The doors won't matter. The shields are designed for kinetic and energy impacts. This is a structural attack. The vibration is coming through the rock itself. We are being shaken apart from the foundation up." The first major tremor hit. It was not a violent, lurching earthquake, but a brutal high-frequency vibration that seemed to liquefy the solid rock for a split second. The world dissolved into a blur of motion and a deafening roar. Men were thrown from their feet, consoles sparked and died as their delicate internal components were shattered by the vibration. A section of the ceiling collapsed in the far corner of the command center, crushing a communications array under a shower of rock and twisted metal. The lights flickered, died, and then came back on under the crimson glow of the emergency power system. In the chaotic aftermath, Cale was on his knees, struggling to get up. His face was bleeding from a small cut on his forehead, his uniform now covered in dust. His eyes were wide with a mixture of fury and the first hints of genuine fear. His textbook solutions had failed. The enemy was not at the gates. The gates themselves were ceasing to exist. "Damage report," he bellowed, his voice hoarse. The replies were a panicked cacophony over the internal comms. "Sector Gamma is gone. Complete structural collapse. Medical Bay reports mass casualties. We've lost primary life support in the lower decks. The main hangar door is compromised. The entire structure is failing." Kyle got to his feet, swaying. He looked at the tactical map, at the blinking red icons representing the silicate positions. His mind, trained for a specific kind of warfare, could only find one answer. "Fire control. I want every deep penetrating missile we have targeted on these coordinates. Now! If the mountain is coming down, we're taking them with us." "Captain, no!" a voice of reason shouted over the din. It was Sergeant Lena Petrova, the base's chief engineer. She was braced against a support column, her face streaked with grime. "The doctor is right. The shock waves will finish us. You'll turn this whole cavern into a gravel pit." "I am in command here, Sergeant," Kyle screamed, his composure finally shattering. He was a cornered animal, lashing out with the only weapon he had left. "Fire those missiles, or I'll have you shot for insubordination." Amidst the shouting and the terror, Aris stood like a rock in a raging river. She hadn't been thrown by the tremor. Her body had moved with it, absorbing the shock with the practiced ease of someone who had lived with seismic instability. Her mind was a whirlwind of calculations, processing the new data with terrifying speed and clarity. The resonance was not random. It was a structured wave, a complex piece of acoustic engineering. It had nodes and antinodes, peaks and troughs. It could be understood, it could be countered. She looked at Kyle, at his wild, desperate eyes. He was not leading. He was reacting, feeding the very chaos that was destroying them. His methods, his training, his entire worldview had been rendered obsolete in a matter of minutes. The orthodox approach had failed, utterly and catastrophically. The failure was not just tactical, it was philosophical. He was trying to fight the mountain, and the mountain was indifferent to his rage. It was a force of nature that could not be defeated, only navigated, and he, Captain Yvonne Cale, did not have a map. The second tremor hit, stronger than the first. The lights died completely, plunging them into absolute darkness for 3 terrifying seconds before the emergency battery backups kicked in, casting long, dancing shadows in the red gloom. The sound was a physical blow, a grinding, tearing agony of rock and metal being pushed beyond their breaking points. More of the ceiling gave way. Screams echoed over the comms, then were abruptly cut off. The base was dying. The mountain was claiming them. In that moment of pure systemic failure, a new voice cut through the darkness and the noise. It was quiet, calm, and absolute. "Sergeant Petrova," all eyes, what few were not blinded by panic, turned. Eris Thorne had stepped forward into the center of the ruined command deck. A single emergency light cast her face in stark relief. She did not look like a scientist anymore. She looked like something ancient, something carved from the same stone that was now trying to kill them. "Sir?" Petrova responded, her training making her use the honorific instinctively, though it was directed at the wrong person. "Give me control of the primary geothermal tap and the resonance frequency of the main power core," Eris said. It was not a request. It was an order. "And I need you to slave every industrial drill on this base to my console, now." Kyle, staggering to his feet, stared at her as if she were insane. "What are you talking about? Have you lost your mind? We are under attack." Eris ignored him completely. Her attention was solely on the engineer. Her gaze held Petrova's, a silent transfer of command. In that look, Petrova saw not madness, but a terrifying, sublime certainty. She saw a plan where Kale offered only a death rattle. She had spent her life listening to the hum of machines, understanding their languages of stress and tolerance. She recognized that same deep, structural understanding in this woman's eyes. She saw a fellow engineer, a master of a craft she could barely comprehend. "Do it, Sergeant," Eris said again, her voice unwavering. This was the moment of the turn, the fulcrum upon which their survival balanced. Petrova looked from the wild-eyed captain, whose authority was now nothing more than a title on a uniform, to the quiet civilian who spoke the language of the disaster. She saw the failure of rank and the undeniable power of competence. Her choice was clear. It was also treason. "Aye, ma'am," Petrova said, her voice firm. She turned to her own station, her fingers flying across the controls, ignoring Kale's sputtering rage. "Rerouting power control to the geodynamics console. Slaving the drills now. You have the core." "Belay that order," Kyle shrieked, stumbling towards Petrova's station. "Sergeant, I will have you court-martialed." A burly master sergeant, the base's senior NCO, quietly stepped into Kyle's path. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, a mountain of a man, his expression grim and resolute. His allegiance had shifted. The formal hierarchy had fractured, replaced by a new, brutally practical one. Authority no longer resided in the insignia on Kale's collar. It flowed to the one person in the room who had a solution. Eris did not seize command. It was given to her by the sheer, undeniable gravity of her competence. The crew, the survivors, looked to her now. She was their only hope. Her fingers danced over the controls Petrova had given her. The console, once a passive listening device, became her conductor's podium. The complex physics of the situation unfolded in her mind not as a threat, but as an equation to be solved. The silicates were using a focused resonance to create a destructive interference pattern within the rock strata, targeting the base's weakest structural points. They were brilliant, but they were also predictable. Their wave was a sustained single-frequency attack, a brute force approach, an explosion. It was the same philosophy Kale had employed. Eris's plan was something else entirely. It was not about overwhelming force. It was about harmony, about resonance and counter-resonance. It was about fighting a song with a more complex, more intelligent song. It was elegant, intellectual, and utterly counterintuitive. "I am turning the entire base into a tuning fork," she explained, her voice a calm lecture in the middle of a hurricane. The remaining crew members gathered around, their faces a mixture of awe and terror. "The geothermal tap will provide the raw power. The core's magnetic containment field can be modulated to produce a specific frequency. The industrial drills, embedded deep in the rock, will act as our transducers, broadcasting the signal. A third tremor, even more violent, shook the room. The master sergeant grabbed a support beam to stay upright, his knuckles white. "Whatever you're doing, Doctor," he grunted, "do it fast." "I am not fighting the wave," Eris continued, her focus absolute. "I am going to match it. Petrova, I need a real-time analysis of the enemy's primary frequency." "Already on it," the engineer replied, her voice tight with concentration. "It's a complex sine wave, but the primary carrier is stable at 12.7 hertz. 12.7 hertz. The resonant frequency of the granite shelf upon which the base was built. A child's choice, obvious, destructive, but not subtle. "Amateurs," Eris murmured under her breath. "I am modulating the core to 12.7 hertz, she announced, her fingers making the final adjustments. "But I'm inverting the phase. We are going to create a destructive interference pattern of our own, a cone of silence. We are going to cancel their wave out." On the main display, a new schematic appeared. A blue wave of energy, representing Eris's counter-frequency, emanated from the center of the base. It met the incoming red wave of the silicate attack. Where they touched, they vanished. "Engaging," she said. "Now." For a terrifying second, the vibration became exponentially worse. The two massive energies, the mountain's agony and their desperate countermeasure, met and fought. The noise became a physical thing, a solid wall of sound that threatened to rupture eardrums and crack bone. The bass screamed its death agony, and then silence. It was the most profound, absolute silence any of them had ever experienced. It was not the absence of noise. It was the active cancellation of it. The humming of the life support, the groaning of the rock, the vibration under their feet, all of it vanished. They were suspended in a perfect, unnatural stillness. It was the eye of the storm, a bubble of perfect calm, carved out of pure chaos by physics and will. They stood in stunned silence, their ears ringing in the sudden quiet. They looked at each other, then at Eris. She hadn't moved. Her face was illuminated by the soft blue glow of her console. She had done the impossible. She had tamed the mountain. But she wasn't finished. "The cone of silence is stable," she reported, her voice the only sound in the universe. "But it's a defensive measure. Now, we end the threat." Her fingers moved again, inputting a new series of commands. "Sergeant Petrova, I am going to introduce a secondary frequency, a harmonic overtone. We're going to use their own carrier wave and piggyback on it. We will modulate it to match the resonance frequency of the crystalline structures in their technology." Petrova's eyes went wide. "You're going to use their own weapon against them?" "They used a sledgehammer," Eris replied, a flicker of something almost like professional disdain in her voice. "I prefer a scalpel." She isolated the unique energy signature of the silicate tunneling equipment. It was a high-frequency crystalline resonance, the very thing that made them so hard to detect by conventional means. But to her, it was a beacon. She programmed the base's emitters, the drills, to broadcast a new, precisely targeted frequency. It was not a wave of power. It was a whisper, a single, perfect note. She pressed the final key. Nothing happened inside their bubble of silence. There was no explosion, no shudder. But on the tactical display, the red icons marking the silicate positions began to blink out one by one. First a dozen, then 50, then all of them. They simply vanished from the map. "What did you do?" the master sergeant whispered, his voice full of awe. "Brittle fracture," Eris said simply. Their technology, their weapons, their support structures, they are all based on grown crystals. Like a singer shattering a glass with the right note, I found the specific frequency of their crystal lattice and amplified it. I didn't destroy them. I simply disassembled them on a molecular level. They turned to dust. The threat was neutralized. The external enemy was gone. The silence that followed was different. It was no longer the artificial quiet of her counterwave, but the genuine, ringing silence of victory, of survival. In the crimson emergency lighting of the ruined command center, the few survivors looked at the unassuming woman in the gray jacket. They were no longer looking at a civilian consultant. They were looking at the force that had saved them. Kyle, slumped against a wall, his face a mask of ash and defeat, stared at her with the eyes of a man who had just witnessed a god reshape his reality. His world of explosions and brute force had been undone by a quiet hum and a perfect note. It was a checkmate delivered in a language he never knew existed. In the profound stillness that followed the solution, a new sound emerged. A calm, authoritative voice crackled over a single, high-priority comm channel that had somehow survived the chaos. It was a channel that bypassed the base's ruined arrays, connecting directly to Fleet Command. Kerberos Base, this is General Madsen, Special Operations Command. Do you read me? The Master Sergeant scrambled to the one functional comm station. General, this is Master Sergeant Rorik. We read you. We are operational. The man's voice, usually a gravelly baritone, was strained with exhaustion and disbelief. Report your status, Master Sergeant, Madsen's voice commanded. My board here lit up like a festival. I saw a seismic event that should have vaporized your entire sector, followed by a complete energy blackout of all hostile signals. What in the hell happened down there? Before Rorik could answer, Kale pushed himself off the wall. Here was a lifeline, a return to the familiar world of rank and protocol. General Madsen, this is Captain Kale. I am the commanding officer. We were hit by a novel enemy weapon, a seismic resonance attack. We sustained heavy casualties and massive structural damage, but we managed to neutralize the threat. He shot a venomous glare at Aris, a desperate attempt to reclaim the narrative, to seize credit for the miracle he had opposed at every turn. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The silence crackled with unspoken meaning. When Madsen spoke again, his voice was cold, stripped of all pleasantries. Captain Kale, I am aware of your position. I am also aware that 30 minutes ago you initiated a launch sequence for your entire deep penetration arsenal, an action that would have, according to our simulations, guaranteed the 100% loss of your command. That launch was countermanded by a non-military authorization code. My question is not what happened. My question is she all right? Kyle froze. The blood drained from his face. She? He looked at Aris, who was calmly running a diagnostic on the mountain's new, stable state, seemingly oblivious to the conversation that was deciding his fate. General, I don't understand, Kale stammered. Put Dr. Thorne on the line, Captain, Madsen ordered, his voice like the closing of a vault door. Aris walked over to the console, took the offered headset from the stunned Master Sergeant, and spoke into it. Her voice was as calm and factual as ever. Madsen, the silicates have developed a crude but effective form of acoustic warfare. The base's structural integrity is compromised by 30%, but the core is stable. The immediate threat is neutralized. Eris, the general's voice replied, and the change in his tone was staggering. The cold commander was gone, replaced by a voice of deep, familiar respect, of relief. I told them it was a mistake to assign you without full disclosure. Are you unharmed? I am functional, she said. And the commander they assigned you, did he get in your way? Eris glanced at Kale. Her gaze was not triumphant or malicious. It was analytical, like a geologist assessing a rock sample for its flaws. He performed as his training dictated, she said. It was the most damning assessment she could have possibly delivered. It was a clinical execution. A grim chuckle came over the comms. Yes, I imagine he did. Madsen's voice became formal again, a weapon being drawn from its sheath. Captain Avion Kale, by my authority as Commander of Special Operations, you are hereby relieved of command of Forward Operating Base Kerberos, effective immediately. You will surrender your command codes to Master Sergeant Rorik and confine yourself to your quarters to await formal inquiry. Your career, for all intents and purposes, is over. Kyle didn't speak. He simply sagged, the last of his authority evaporating under the heat of Madsen's words. He was a hollow man in a dusty uniform. Master Sergeant Rorik, Madsen continued, you will take your orders and the orders of every soul on that base, from Dr. Thorne until further notice. Her authority in that sector is absolute. Is that understood? Sir, yes, sir, Rorik stammered, looking at Aris with a new, profound reverence. Understood. But Madsen had one final thing to say, the final piece of the puzzle that would recontextualize everything for the survivors of Kerberos. Captain Cal, he said, his voice laced with a cold, hard lesson. For your own education, you were very proud of your academy record. You graduated top of your class in unconventional warfare strategy, a course taught by Colonel Vance, correct? Yes, sir, Kale whispered, his voice barely audible. Colonel Vance was one of the finest tactical minds I ever knew, Madsen said. And for 6 months, at the very start of his career, he was a student. He was taught everything he knew about seismic warfare, about fighting in deep earth environments, about thinking in 4 dimensions, by the woman you just offered to teach. He said she was the most terrifyingly brilliant and brutally unforgiving instructor he ever had. He washed out of her advanced program twice before he finally understood. The revelation landed in the silent command center with the force of a physical blow. Kyle stared at Aris, his mind collapsing under the weight of it. This quiet civilian, this rock watcher, she was not just an expert, she was the source, the architect of the very doctrine he had failed to apply. Her call sign, the one whispered in the highest echelons of command, the name of the ghost who wrote the rules for fighting wars in the dark, finally clicked into place. Acknowledge your orders, Captain, Madsen's voice cut in, demanding a final act of submission. Kyle looked at the woman known as Echo. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He just gave a single, jerky nod, a man completely and utterly broken. His fall was swift, decisive, and absolute. The reckoning was complete. In the days that followed, a new order settled over the ruins of Kerberos base. It was a quieter, more methodical existence. The frantic energy of Kale's command was replaced by the calm, deliberate precision of Eris's. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her instructions were issued in low, factual tones, and they were followed without question or hesitation. The survivors worked with a focused purpose, clearing rubble, repairing systems, and securing their fragile hold within the mountain. They were no longer soldiers fighting an enemy. They were engineers and scientists working to understand and pacify their environment, led by the one who understood it best. Aris was their undisputed leader, yet she showed no pleasure in her victory, no satisfaction in Kale's downfall. He was escorted from the base by a specialist team from command, a ghost disappearing into the bureaucracy he had once championed. Aris did not watch him leave. Her attention was already elsewhere, focused on the complex task of stabilizing the fractured rock around them. Her victory was not personal. It was the simple, logical outcome of a correctly solved equation. Ego had no place in her calculations. The awe she inspired was palpable. The soldiers and technicians who had once dismissed her as a civilian oddity now moved around her with a hushed reverence. They watched her work, her fingers gliding over holographic displays that pulsed with the lifeblood of the mountain, and they saw a level of mastery that bordered on the supernatural. They spoke of her in whispers, calling her Echo, the name General Madsen had revealed, a legend made flesh. One evening, Sergeant Petrova approached her while she was working in her alcove. The command center was slowly being rebuilt around them, the sounds of welders and plasma cutters replacing the groans of dying rock. Petrova didn't speak. She simply placed a steaming thermal mug on the edge of Aris's console. It wasn't coffee. It was a nutrient-dense protein slurry, the standard sustenance in the deep base. It was a simple, practical gesture, an offering of fuel. It was the highest form of respect one engineer could offer another. Aris looked up from her work, her eyes briefly meeting Petrova's. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. Petrova nodded back. In that silent exchange, a new hierarchy was cemented, one based not on rank or regulation, but on shared competence and mutual respect. It was the only kind of hierarchy Aris recognized. Petrova then pointed to a fluctuating waveform on the display. The harmonic resonance of the basalt layer, she said, framing it as a statement, not a question. It's still unstable. Yes, Aris replied, but it is beginning to normalize. The mountain is healing. It was a quiet acknowledgement, a moment of teaching offered and accepted between peers. The cultural shift was complete. Her work there was nearly done. The base was secure, the enemy was gone, and a new, more resilient command structure was in place with Petrova as its de facto head until a formal replacement arrived. Aris had been a catalyst, a force of pure logic introduced into a chaotic system to restore balance. Now that balance was achieved, her purpose was fulfilled. She had no desire to command or to rule. She was a solver of impossible problems, and this problem was solved. One cycle later, a transport shuttle arrived, cutting silently through the thin atmosphere to land in the newly repaired hangar. It brought supplies and a new commanding officer, a seasoned colonel with a degree in planetary engineering who had specifically requested the post. When he met Aris, he simply shook her hand and said, "It's an honor. I read your early work on lithospheric wave propagation. It changed everything." Aris merely nodded and boarded the transport. She disappeared as quietly as she had arrived, a ghost slipping back into the shadows of the command structure. She left behind not just a saved base, but a legend. A story that would be told for years in the hushed confines of deep space outposts and special operations briefing rooms. A lesson about the nature of true power. She did not look back as the shuttle ascended, leaving the scarred mountain behind. Her focus was already on the next data set, the next impossible problem waiting for her on some other forgotten rock in the dark. She was Aris Thorne, She was Echo. She was a quiet professional who listened to the songs of worlds, a woman who understood that the greatest power was not in the loud, violent explosion, but in the quiet, perfect, and devastatingly precise application of a single, resonant truth. Hers was a lonely, austere legacy, written not in history books, but in the silent, stable heart of the mountains she saved.